pretty good.
And a number of other things. I'll let Jared tell you all about his background. But we'll just thank Jared for coming along today. Again, like to say people volunteering to talk to you today, so thank you for coming back. And let's give Jared a warm welcome.
Yeah, so thanks very much. I'm an interaction design researcher, so game design is not my speciality. So all of you in this room outrank me in terms of expertise in the area of game design. But somehow, through sort of fate of chance, I've ended up teaching this one amazing unit called creative coding. And so amidst all my research and admin duties, I get this one little chance to have fun each year. And that's what I want to talk to you about today, creative coding. I've been teaching this unit for probably 10 years on and off since I came to QUT, and improving it gradually over the years. And each year I do something new, try to do something new each year. And this presentation is sort of the story of what I tried to do new this year. I sort of had the idea that in art and design, we often have these exhibitions, right? Grad shows, and I just this morning went and kind of screen grabbed a whole bunch of the Australian universities grad shows for art and design, and I've included the wonderful graphic for our event here today, because even though it's a conference, we do also have the element of exhibition, of showing your work. And there's something really important about it. Like in a design degree, it seems to be that part of like becoming a designer is being able to be confident enough to show your work. And it's also sort of almost like a rite of passage in those grad shows where you get to be finally the person showing their work to a public. Maybe your mums and dads and partners and families come along and see your work and really understand what you've been doing for all those years, maybe for the first time. I know mine did when they came and saw my grad show. But it's a sort of really interesting area because when you look at the literature, there's actually not a lot written about it. Like for the learning and teaching literature, we haven't really thought, well, what do these actually do in terms of learning? So I kind of wanted to think about that. The unit that I teach, creative coding, the subject code is DXB211. If you want to come to QT and study it, you're very welcome. I sort of chose this image because if there's one idea that I want students to walk away from the unit feeling, it's that they can code, right? So it's a unit for people who may never have coded before, complete novices. So I want them to sort of feel that they can have this creative coding superpower that's been so important to me in my career. So it's undergraduate, about 250 students in the semester, range of different degrees. It's a compulsory unit in the game design major in the Bachelor of Games and Interactive Environments at QT, and in the interaction design degree. But it's university-wide elective, so I get students from every corner of the university, delivered in person and online, and like I said, there's a real range of experience with that. So it's creative coding, not game coding as such, but it has a very playful and exploratory and creative side to it. And about a third of our students are game design students, so kind of a very strong game design theme kind of comes through in the way that the students engage with the unit. But you'll also see examples of student work that are more on the artistic visualization side, data visualization, straight up interaction design as well. I teach in P5.js, which is a JavaScript version of the processing library, which some of you may be familiar with. And we use the P5.js editor, which is an online editor. So this all came in really handy later on when I wanted to put these exhibitions together. Like I said, we did a literature review to try and understand what's happening in these events. Is it improving the learning experience or not? And it's really difficult to find much written on it. So I did a search in the academic literature from 2000 to 2023, so over 20 years of research on just using this kind of query: exhibition and design or art or creative practice or dance and learning. And after kind of going through and looking at whether the papers were really relevant, over that whole 20-year period, there were only about 20 papers in this major database that were really relevant. And none of those were from interaction design or game design. So there's a real gap here in the literature. We actually don't know, in an academic sense, really what these are doing. I think there's some clues, but it needs research. And Josh has been working with me as well on this project as a research assistant, and he's gone further and done a further search on creative coding to kind of flesh out the results. Now, all of this is very, very preliminary, so I can't really give you anything definitive. I just kind of want to give you some initial reflections, but these are the sorts of things that seem to be kind of coming out of the literature that's there. And you can really think of it as a series of tensions to think about. So on that kind of top line, the top line is yellow. That top yellow line, what you sort of see there is the kind of themes that seem interesting in this literature. So there's quite a lot of research on the STEAM or STEM kind of band. You would have heard of the STEM as like science, technology, engineering, maths, and then you add a little bit of art to it and you get STEAM. And so often there are papers written about sort of spicing up a technology course by getting the students to create some kind of creative outcome and then exhibit it at the end. So there's quite a bit of research on that STEM stuff. But there's a sort of a tension there, which I think you also see in a kind of a tension between whether these exhibitions are more kind of art and design led or science and technology led. And that's also a choice in how we would teach a technology unit like creative coding. Do we focus on the creative side or do we focus on the coding side? Studio learning is also a really important one in design. So in design disciplines like architecture, where you work in a studio, traditionally you would work in a studio with the master or the very experienced person, and you would learn from them through a kind of very much a kind of coaching and dialogue process, where you're actually engaging in that process in little mini exhibitions all the way through the semester. You're showing your work all of the time, you're getting feedback, and then once or twice each month you pin your work up on the board and you get feedback from your peers. So there's maybe a continuum from the studio learning through to the exhibition context that could be interesting to think about. And the last one is this idea of whether it's an individual focused event or a communal focused event. Actually, if I just skip back to that previous slide of the institutional shows, there's often a tension in the institutional show between the show serving the purpose of the prestige of the institution or highlighting and supporting the experience of the communal student body. And they sort of serve both those purposes. Some theory on the second line that seems to be relevant to this area. So the pink row on the second line, student engagement, authentic learning, situated learning, and student identity all seem to be kind of theories from teaching and learning that appear very relevant to this area. And I think student identity is really important because a lot of the students that come into my unit do not see themselves as coders or do not see themselves as creative. So if I want them to go away with that kind of teddy bear superhero feeling about themselves, we've got to sort of change that sense of perception that they have of themselves. The last line, some kind of ideas for what we should aim for when we design a student exhibition for a learning experience. Try to make sure that it's affirming and supportive. Look at modes that are multimodal, tangible, or embodied. That the work should be challenging but achievable. And that there should be opportunities for peer feedback and reflection. So that's the literature, and now what I want to do is, that's the sort of theory in the background. Now what I want to do is step through what actually we did. So I had this idea that one of the problems for new media design disciplines like game design or interaction design is you can't print it out and stick it up on the wall, right? You can't stand next to a poster of your game. We could, and you could probably wave your arms around and explain how the game works, but to really experience the game in a public exhibition setting, it needs to be exhibited. And sort of a natural kind of choice to go to was that idea of the arcade cabinet as a way of exhibiting interactive game design work. And often what happens in game design exhibitions is everyone brings in their laptop, right? And I think that's the example we have today, and that's really nice in itself, but it's a very internal sort of setting. It's within the body of peers. And what I was interested in doing here was actually taking something very public, so putting it in a public space where members of the public come in and interact with it. And in that sense, putting your laptop up there is probably not the best choice. So this kind of cabinet was an interesting thing to explore. One thing that I've noticed today actually is that a lot of the students have talked about an action research process, or an action research methodology. And I'd like to just reflect on that a little bit as well as we step through this. Because I think an action research methodology is really good for helping you structure the big cycles of iteration. But it doesn't always give you as much guidance on how to engage in those micro cycles of reflection as you go through a process. So there are other kinds of methodologies you might think about augmenting an action research approach with, such as kind of a reflective practice approach. So some obvious design inspirations from retro arcade cabinets, but also the kind of the computers that I grew up with in the 80s as well. I did a lot of sketching, sort of trying to figure out what a kind of form language for these arcades might be. And this is what I mean about this process of slowly going through little cycles of design and thinking about what you've done. It's like each time you draw one of these sketches, you think a little bit and you listen to the back talk, as Donovan puts it, and you sort of find your way through the problem. This one kind of sums up the idea of how I wanted the things to work. Like I've done a lot of installations over my time as a researcher, and it's really it's always such a pain to bump in and bump out. So I wanted something that I could just carry in on the bump out, plonk down on the bump in, plonk down, plug in, and just kind of leave sitting there. And then when I was ready to take away, I would unplug it, pick it up and walk away so it would fit under my arm. So that sort of practicality was really important too. So then, similar to the sort of sketching, that process of drawing is then also a very long and very iterative process of making. So laser cutting, sourcing electronics, fitting them to the laser cut pieces, trying out multiple iterations of that, painting it, all of that stuff. The whole time that you're doing this, you're thinking. And I think it's the same thing if you're sculpting a 3D character in a game, or an environment, or thinking about the lighting, or doing the coding in a game. All of that time you're thinking, right? So that's a really important part of the research that we do. So anyway, I ended up with these three different cabinets. Huey is the arty cabinet, Dewey is the data cabinet, and Louie is the play cabinet. Huey, Dewey, and Louie, and you'll either get the Donald Duck reference or the Silent Running reference, and I'll let you decide which of those people you are. But I have my colleague Truna Jane Turner to thank for these names. I think they're absolutely brilliant. She came up with them. So one of the things that I realised as I was going through that process of drawing and thinking and making was that something my students might have lacked in previous years was a real feeling for the physical act of playing on a game. Remember I said that we work in that web editor, the P5JS web editor? So normally in previous years what would happen is I would give the assignment brief and the students would create something in the web editor and it would work, it would look beautiful. They would submit their assignment in to be marked by the marker. The marker would mark it, we'd look at it in moderation, we'd discuss it a little bit within the teaching team. But the only people that would ever really see it and interact with it was the person who coded it, maybe a couple of their friends, the markers and the rest of the teaching team. Like, it was such a small and narrow set of people got a chance to interact with it. And once we sort of reframed this assignment to be for these kinds of public interactions, I think that it really clicked more like what would the actual physical interaction of a game be. You know, like if you have gone to an old school arcade, and I'm sure most of you have, one of the really interesting things there is the variety of interactions. You've got the dancing games and the basketball hoop games, and then the joystick games and the shooter games. They employ physical interaction in a really interesting way. So I wanted to make sure that each of these cabinets had a different sort of set of inputs to think about and a different set of interactions to think about. So Huey had a microphone, web camera, and just 3 arcade buttons. So you could think of that as being more like artistic, movement-driven visualizations. Dewey had a keyboard trackpad and then left and right mouse buttons. So it would lend itself to text-based game interactions or data visualizations. And then Louis, the play cabinet, Louis for ludic, inputs there, just a joystick and the arcade buttons. I wrote some software to take the P5JS sketches that the students had written, and I wrote an Electron app, which is just a packaged up version of the Chromium framework, which can run kind of web applications as a executable. And the nice thing about that is it will actually compile and run on a Raspberry Pi, which meant I could keep the cost of this really low, and I could actually just also download all of the student work straight from the assignment submission system and just package it straight into the application and put it onto the cabinets. And then there's a sort of a simple navigation where the students provided a thumbnail of each of their works, and you could kind of click left and right and then select to go into each one. So they got this brief to develop an interactive creative coding sketch for the lanes. And if you're not from Brisbane, the lanes is a sort of a couple of little pedestrian streets in Fortitude Valley. And we got support from the owners of the lanes. There's a family that owns the lanes to hold the exhibition there, and they were actually very, very generous with their time and also supported it with quite a bit of money to support some food and drinks and prizes for the students. So it was really wonderful. This is the other thing about that kind of physicality of not just having it go into the assignment submission system, but go into a real place, is that you then sort of start to think about that place. Like, what is the lanes? What is the valley? What would make sense to go in that space? And that was another thing that students could kind of hook onto. So this is one of the lanes, Bakery Lane. So you can kind of see just from these photos, just some of the textures that are kind of available visually in that space. The kind of spatial configuration of it, it's quite intimate, but then it opens up at the back, and there's a variety of different surfaces that we plan to project on. So on each of the cabinets, you can also actually put a projector in on the back and just show a mirror of the display on the wall. And then this is Wind Lane. It's behind the zoo, so like kind of a really interesting musical setting here. Quiver is in that area, so and they have a DJ booth, which is there quite often, and Ben's Burgers is probably the best burgers in Brisbane. I'm kind of spruiking the lanes because I owe the owners of the lanes some advertising for being so generous with their support, but it's a really great space. And then also this little details like this was a kind of a distributed text-based poem that was just kind of left over there when they renovated the place, and they've just kind of left it as part of it. So the exhibition itself was on the 28th of July, so it's about half a year ago now. I just had to take a photo of me strapping my little Huey into the car to take to the lanes. I wanted to make sure that they got there safe. We went there and set it all up, and I'm going to show you a couple of examples of the student work that came out of that, and then I'll show you a video so you can get a sense of what the night was like, and then we'll just reflect on those ideas that I presented at the start and sort of think about have we got there yet. So these are 4 students that I think were exemplary works, and there were lots of really great works, but these are 4 that really stood out. Eli Southwood had a kind of a text based, but not a keyboard based. It was kind of a click through adventure story called Oh, a Dragon, where just beautiful graphics and a lovely little story with kind of 2 branches. And it was just the right sort of size of experience for this setting, like about 5 or 6 minutes long, and you could have played through both the stories, and you could move on and have a glass of wine with your friends. You know, you don't want to be there for hours and hours with this kind of an experience. Eli had not done any programming before this unit other than JavaScript and CSS. So, that's exactly the kind of student that I really want to succeed in this. And you'll see Eli talking about their experiences in the video. Oops, sorry. The second one, Charlotte, England. It's Winston, the Win Lane Ibis. Again, very, very simple concept. This was for the Louis, the arcade cabinet one. You kind of have this character of Winston, the Win Lane Ibis, and you can kind of choose clothes for it. So you just select the clothes, click, and then drag them and drop them on the Ibis. You can dress it up in a crazy outfit, and then it goes out for the night at the Valley. So it's kind of dressed up like a crazy alternate person to go to the Valley and have a lot of fun. And plays some guitar, and it's really good. So again, short, simple, and really nicely responsive to the brief. Isaac Shea, the program, that's another one that's running out there. It's kind of quite a long story where you kind of click through and you get to interact with this slightly suspiciously, possibly evil artificial intelligence. And then the Magic Keyboard by Stephen Hovarth was a really lovely one that just worked extremely well on the kind of projection scale. So really just beautiful colors. You could kind of press on the keyboard and it would play notes. Very simple interaction. So they're not complex pieces, but they all responded in a way that I thought was really, really beautiful and thoughtful.
I designed a program that uses the webcam where to text your hands, and if you start off with a small little plant, and with your hand movements, you make the plant grow into your tree. I think it's pretty cool. I feel this one has given me great motivation and inspiration.
My piece is a music video that I did, and it's a space rocket that has to get to the moon. And basically, if you don't do the right things in the right time, you explode. It's about this journey of getting to the moon and landing on the moon. And seeing these little guys come out, that's the real key. That's what you're playing the game for.
My piece of assessment is called Winston the Win Lane Ibis. It's about an ibis that goes to Win Lane and goes. You dress him up in the different clothes, there's some vintage clothes from the shops, and then he goes to a music concert at the zoo. So my assignment is joystick based, and then it's kind of like a claw machine. I'm an IT student, so I think I just wanted an opportunity to use some of my programming skills that I've gotten from that degree in a creative way. I think I'm going to use a lot of the skills I've learned in how to apply my programming skills in a creative way in my future career.
So it's something I got based off Super Mario. So it's a game where you need to do a lot of like jumping and make sure you don't fall into the water. There's an ice block where you run. It's a fire that's running. That's a character. I enjoy making games. And something like arcade games, that's my life, and I would like to do that.
It was my first time using JavaScript and decided to code a sort of visual novel adventure game, kind of old school dragons and questing and adventure and stuff, with a bit of comedy thrown in for fun. You know, even if it's not necessary, if it excites you, if you want to do it, do it. People seem to enjoy it, and it's a lot of fun. It's really satisfying having that final product that you can be really proud of because you put your everything into it.
So yeah, I think you can see that the students, I think they were engaged. One important thing to say here is that this was voluntary for the students to be a part of the exhibition. So I think that was really important because obviously you need to hand in the assignment to pass the unit. But I don't want to put anyone in a situation where they they might still be learning and they're not comfortable showing their work publicly. So these were people who were happy to have their work they agreed to be in the exhibition. I didn't force anyone into this situation. And I think that's really important for that challenging but achievable. There needs to be a risk, but you can't put people in an embarrassing situation. One thing I think we could definitely have done more, and which I will be looking at this year, is this idea of peer feedback and reflection. There were opportunities for that on the night, but it would be really nice to be able to give students the ability to experience that during the semester when they could still use that feedback to make their games better. So I think what might be nice is to have a little event in the class halfway through, sort of thing. But yeah. Just want to acknowledge my amazing teaching team. Josh was one of my tutors last semester, but also Lewis, Kirsten and Manisha have been amazing, amazing colleagues over the last few years. Arthur and Melitza from the Lanes, and this whole project has been supported by a very generous grant from my faculty, and there are a number of my colleagues on that. And last, just to acknowledge the amazing creative coding students. That they make my life so meaningful. Yeah, so that's that, and that's my GitHub. There's nothing there yet, but I will put up the code for that Electron, I promise, and also the CNC code for the STL files for the cabinets if you want to fabricate them yourself, and a bomb and that stuff. But a bill of materials, not a literal bomb, just a bill of materials. But yeah. Any questions? Do we have time for questions? I hope I didn't go too long.
So thank you. First, thanks, Jared. It's great to see what's going on, especially in the interaction design space. So yeah, questions?
Hello. So you mentioned that you didn't want to bring your laptop out to the public. Was that more so to take away from the standardized play? Or was it more of like a lower cost things that way? Well, just a lower cost thing to make your own sort of like cabinet.
Yeah, so great question. Like I was talking about this thing of the reflection as you're doing these design processes. So often what happens there is there's a whole lot of things that you realise fit together, and that was one of them. So there's a whole lot of reasons of not wanting to take a laptop. One of them is that I want students to not just go for the cliched WASD platformer game. I want them to just sort of step out of that a little bit, because I'd seen in the past a lot of the students would just have very stereotypical kind of keyboard interaction. They might do amazing programming projects, but the kind of creative side wasn't always as pushed as they could have done. So I think taking a sort of a sideways step into a cabinet, and it's still got you could still choose the one with the keyboard and do WASD. I mean, that's totally fine. You wouldn't be penalised for that at all. But why do WASD on a keyboard when you've got another one that's got an arcade stick? Do you know what I mean? Or something else. So that was one. I wanted to get them to think a bit more about interactions and what interactions made sense for them. The second one was the cost and the security of it. So, the Valley this was on a Friday night, is not always the best place to kind of leave a laptop lying around. And like even these, I had people guarding them. These are my babies. I cannot let anything happen to them. But I definitely couldn't expect students to bring their own laptops and put them in that kind of a setting. It just wouldn't be fair to the students. And I don't have the resources to bring that many laptops out either. The other thing about doing the cabinets is I could really control the environment, right? So there's 250 students in the unit, about 50 of them elected to be a part of the exhibition. So each cabinet has 10 to 15 students on it. So that's why there's that gallery, and you can kind of click left and right to choose the different ones. So I could kind of manage that if I managed the hardware. Last thing is this kind of bump in and bump out thing. Again, it's like you've controlled the thing, you can carry it under your arm, like they're easy to transport. They have a battery inside them, which a laptop also would have, but yeah, it's just more hassle, I think. That was the thought.
Any other questions for Jared? Ralph?
Hey Jared, great presentation, great work. See what you're doing now. Did the students get to test their things out on the cabinets during the semester? No.
No, Ralph, and that's you're close to the speaker at the back. Yeah, that's one of the things that I need to change next year. And so where I was talking about having maybe a playthrough halfway through the assignment cycle, I think that would be really necessary. But just the practicalities of getting all of this done and working amidst all of the other hurly-burly of the semester, it just wasn't feasible this year. But yeah, definitely. And it's great to see you again. We'll have to have a chat.
Yeah. Any more? Last one? Right.
So I know he's here for the last one, but I have two questions. First one was, how long did they have to do the assignment?
Thank you for asking, because I meant to mention that. It's only 6 weeks.
6 weeks.
Yeah, and
Okay.
this is the second assignment that they've done.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
I was wondering how you encouraged the more technical people to embrace that sort of creative side of it, because the game students tend to be quite tech-focused, using games as a like a trade skill or a technical focused design challenge, rather than this sort of more creative outlet for themselves. And if there's any methods that you use to try and pull out that creativity from them, or like inspire that creative process.
So really it's my teaching team that does that work, because they're the tutors that are actually really working with them one-on-one in the tutorials.
Sure.
So each week we have a teaching team meeting where we talk about issues that are coming up in the class. And the kind of things that we would talk about is, well look, I think it's important to meet students where they are. Like, I want everyone to succeed, whether they're a novice or a really experienced and competent software engineer. And the marking criteria of the unit are set up so that people will succeed if they've got a strength in one of those areas. So it's fine for them to really focus on the technical side. There's actually a heck of a lot you can do with JavaScript to really push yourself technically. Like that one that's got the webcam, there's machine learning libraries for JavaScript now that you can download, ML5. You can do pose recognition. You can do really complicated stuff just in the browser. So there's plenty for them to get their teeth into. But we would always just try to encourage them just to push it. Just ask questions, I think. Just ask questions about how could you go a little bit further. Yeah. What's that?
You always talk about the what ifs.
The what ifs. Yeah, thanks Josh. Yeah, one of the sort of catch cries in the unit is asking what if questions. So there's a video interview with a very famous creative coder, Zach Lieberman, where he talks about what if a line could uncurl and curl? Like what would that be like? And then he writes a little computer program where you draw a line and it curls up and uncurls, and it's kind of very simple animation. But it's that idea of like, what if you could draw with clouds? What if you could, what if you could draw with rainbows? And so we introduce this idea of what if questions very early, and then often come back to that when we get stuck with a student. Well, what if something else happened? Yeah, that's sometimes a way of opening up. Yeah.
These what if questions tend to be quite high level and abstract, like what if you could paint with clouds, or does it come back to the student's work with like what if you did this part differently, or what if you did that?
I think you need to contextualize it for the student,
Sure.
but you don't want to direct the student, and that's part of the skill of being a good tutor. Students sometimes want you to just direct them to do what they need to do to get a 7. And they'll sometimes just say to you, just tell me what I need to do.
Only sometimes?
not always, and I totally get that. And so I would normally have a conversation with them and say, look, what you've got is a good sketch. You're going to pass with what you've got. Don't be anxious about that, but kind of forget about the mark for a second and just think, what could you do that's actually fun and interesting here? That's my approach. But yeah, I mean, it's being a tutor is a dark art. I don't know how people do it. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Jared. Thanks for coming in today. It's really great to share what they're doing. Just going to invite